Queen Elizabeth and the British government's policies that resulted in Kenyan freedom fighters living in concentration camps. Today, we're going to talk about the British policies that led to the imprisonment of the Mao Mao resistors of colonialism in Kenya. The Mao Mao Uprising was a rebellion against British colonial rule in Kenya, which lasted from 1952 to 1960 and assisted in securing Kenya's independence. Most of the issues that resulted in the Mao Mao Uprising included the displacement of Kikuyus from settler farms, loss of land to British settlers, poverty, and the absence of genuine political representation for Africans. During the 8-year uprising, approximately 32 white settlers, 200 British police, and army soldiers lost their lives, but more than 1,800 African civilians and 20,000 Mao Mao freedom fighters were killed. Even though the uprising was directed mainly against British colonials and the white settlers, most of the war was between Mao Mao rebels and loyalist Africans fighting for the British. Our goal here is to discuss the British policies that led to the imprisonment of Mao Mao resistors in colonial Kenya. The Mao Mao Uprising began in the 1950s among the Kikuyu people of Kenya. The group led a violent rebellion against the British colonial rule. And during the 1950s, the Mao Mao movement was banned by British leaders because of their resistance. In October of 1952, following a campaign of violence and killings, the British authorities declared a state of emergency in colonial Kenya. This commenced 4 years of militarism directed against Mao Mao rebels. According to Mwangi 1991, by the end of 1956, more than 11,000 Mao Mao resistors had been killed in the revolt, together with approximately 100 Europeans and 2,000 African loyalists. Following these events, over 20,000 Mao Mao freedom fighters were placed in detention camps where a lot of effort was put into altering their nationalist aspirations against the British government. Despite these efforts, the Kikuyu resistance led to Kenyan independence movement and Jomo Kenyatta rising to the presidency after independence. Jomo Kenyatta was also jailed in 1953. However, he then managed to become Prime Minister of independent Kenya in 1963. It took many years, up to 2003, for the Kenyan government to remove the Mao Mao ban. The policy of reallocation by the British, which led to expropriation of fertile land from Kenyan locals, and which also led to them losing their land rights to white settlers who mainly came from Britain and South Africa. This move marked the beginning of a pattern that would define the relationship between Europeans and Kenyan locals for the first half of the 20th century. The Crown Lands Ordinance Act of 1915 revoked Kenyan locals' few remaining land rights, displacing them from their land, making them agricultural proletariat. This led to hundreds of thousands of Kenyans living in poverty in the slums of Nairobi and the infertile rural areas for decades. The decades of ill treatment and oppression under British rule under Queen Elizabeth II formed an atmosphere of bitterness which led to the creation of the Mao Mao Uprising. Specific policies led to the imprisonment of Mao Mao members, including the declaration of the state of emergency in Operation Jock Scott. This operation was a coordinated police movement that resulted in the arrest of 187 Kikuyus. These Kikuyus were believed by the government to be leaders of the Mao Mao movement, which mainly included leaders of the KAU movement, and Operation Jock missed out on many members of the Mao Mao Central Committee. The deployment of British troops together with Operation Jock disrupted and forced the rebels into submission. British troops began a policy of collective punishment which was directed at undermining popular support of the Mao Mao. Under this policy, if a local village was discovered to be supporting the Mao Mao, the whole village was declared as such, resulting in their land eviction policy. Following these policies, many Kikuyus were evicted from their homes and were shifted into areas declared as Kikuyu reserves. One specific ugly element of the eviction policy was the utilization of concentration camps to deal with those suspected to have any kind of dealings or sympathy with the Mao Mao. Abuse and torture was common in the camps as British guards used beatings, sexual abuse, and killings to get information from the prisoners and forced them into renouncing their allegiance to the Mao Mao. Following the murder of 32 white officials by the Mao Mao, the British responded brutally by detaining approximately 150,000 Kenyans in concentration camps whereby survivors were beaten, tortured, killed, and sexually assaulted. For more than half a century later, a handful of survivors are now suing the British government. Based on a series of interviews carried out on some of these survivors, many describe these camps approved by the British government to have had routine tortures, beatings, and even widespread typhoid, which resulted in the loss of many lives of many Mao Mao freedom fighters. One survivor claims the colonial officials would beat them from the day they arrived with sticks, fists, and hit them with their boots. They were flogged, starved, worked to death, tortured, and forced to confess their Mao Mao oaths. The survivors also described the gross details of how women were raped and sexually abused. And now they're demanding compensation and an apology for what they perceive as a system of organized cruelty that had never been practiced anywhere else throughout the years of the British Empire. So these were some of the policies that were executed by the British government in colonial Kenya under the leadership of Queen Elizabeth II. In 2003, the then Foreign Secretary William Hague announced that the UK was willing to pay £19.9 million in costs and compensation to more than 5,228 elderly Kenyans who suffered torture and abuse during the Mao Mao Uprising. An additional lawsuit was filed in 2016 with more than 40,000 claimants, but that case was dismissed on the grounds that the events are more than 50 years old and out of the statute of limitation. Please be sure to subscribe to Global Black History. Thank you for watching.